Welcome to Panelism, the podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Taylor Trask.
I'm Todd A.
And it's book club time again, Todd. We are back with another kind of more deliberate book club episode. It's been a little while since our last one. Do you remember what the last book was for book club? Because I don't.
Oh my God! Why did you do that to me?
Well, I was hoping you would, and you could make me look bad by comparison, but we both forgot. So we'll just put that up on the shelf for right now. I'm furiously going back through to see if we remember. Oh, it was Black Monday Murders, Volume 1 and 2. Yeah, well, it was January 29th. Black Monday Murders.
Though? We did talk about why art after that in April.
That's true.
And we both read that. We didn't pitch it ahead of time to give any listeners a chance to read it. So that's why we didn't call it a book club. But
that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
You're right.
Both,
yeah. Wow.
Great. And that's and now January feels like 18 years ago. So gee, I mean, who knows? Who knows what's happened since then? Hey, let me ask you this before we get into anything else. How have you been doing this summer without any movies to see in a theater? Has that troubled you at all?
I mean, no more than all the other troubling stuff about being locked down.
Okay.
Because to me, and I think we mentioned this a little bit on our last show, the movies are just such a great escape for me.
Yeah.
And especially in summertime when I have been fortunate enough where I can make some of my own freelance hours, going to like an afternoon movie was just such a treat for myself. And especially because there's no air conditioning in my house. It's great to just go to the theater for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I miss it, but it's not because of a lack of good content for sure. Yeah.
I had a moment over this weekend. I sort of not a breakdown, but just really hit me hard that I have been missing that experience way more than I realized. And then I was actually doing the math. The last movie I saw in a theater was Rise of Skywalker in December.
Oh my God.
And that long. I thought surely I saw something in February. I was going back through my Fandango and Alamo purchases. Nope. December, Rise of Skywalker. So it has been a while.
Okay.
And that
I saw Underwater
the best movie.
I know, exactly. I was thinking I saw Underwater with Kristen Stewart, that movie, and I just had to Google the release date. So that would have been January at least. Man, what a good question. What was the last movie you saw in the theater?
Oh God. And I wish it was something better than that. I thought maybe there was something else, but nope, that was it. And then I've seen movies on TV. By the way, shout out, more like a public service announcement. Any of you out there with Disney Plus who are cruising around going, hey, that Artemis Fowl movie looks kind of good, stay away. It was possibly, unless you want to hate watch a movie, which is also fun, but stay away. That's where it really hit me, because I was sitting there watching that on Saturday and I thought, my God, thank goodness I'm not in a theater watching this, because it's one of the worst movies ever made. But then I thought, wait, when was the last time I was in a theater? Oh my God. And that's where all this came kind of pouring out. And I just realized summer movies I mentioned on previous podcasts are kind of a rite of passage for me. They are as sort of seasonal. And a lot of the summer movies are big and dumb and, expensive, and that's totally fine. But there's that communal experience, that opening night experience. Man, I still miss it. And this year in particular, of all the times to not have it, I wish there was some version of it. And theaters are even opening as we speak, but who knows how that will go. But man, if anybody out there missing summer movies or missing going to the movie theater, please let us know, because it's good to share this.
Have you now? You're different from me because you have a woman who, whether she likes it or not, has committed to spend the rest of her life with you. So you have a cohabitator. But have you and Rachel done any movie watching with friends, or that kind of hey, let's do a video call and we all watch a movie at the same time?
Nah, not yet. Only because I think to agree upon a movie to watch outside of just the two of us would prove challenging. And then we're one of those couples who it's never planned. It's never okay, tonight at 7, we're going to have movie night. It's I'll just walk in and she's about to watch something cool. I'm like, what is this? Hold on, let me grab something. I'll come back and then we'll just watch. like one of the, and this is kind of giving a movie on Disney Plus a good review. I think this was back in January, February, whenever Disney Plus launched. I think that was February. There was a movie called Stargirl, not the comic book Stargirl that's on CW, but like almost like a John Hughes-esque kind of Disney movie called Stargirl that was just delightful as hell. I'm not even going to say anything more about it. Just discover it and learn about it. But she had just started kind of watching. And I was like, what is this? And it's one of those things where I'd walked in, I kind of stood there for a few minutes, and I was like, I ended up just watching the whole thing with her. So to do that with friends is a little bit, we're just not organized enough to do it, I think.
Well, I mean, I try to make a joke about a life partner, but that it would be such a relief to me to have someone to just do movie night with in the same house. But yeah,
well, if you're ever wanting to join in and you've got a pitch for us, let us know. I'm happy to do it with you, because I think of all the people that it would work well with. I think having you recommend something, it's like, okay, here, we're all gonna watch it, and then maybe every hour we stop. It's like, what, where are you? Did you go to the bathroom yet? Okay, we just do like a little intermission chit chat.
I don't think we have a rabid enough fan base to do like a Discord watch, but that would also be fun to try to do. That would be fun. We're going to start the movie at 8 p.m. and just like everybody's going to chat about it. Because I'll tell you what's on my list for that, for like a good sit at home movie watch, is Birds of Prey, because I have not seen it.
Oh yeah, that's out early too on streaming. As they kind of cut the theatrical short and then re-promoted it. On the Amazons of the world. Well, since our last podcast, some other things have happened in the news world. In addition to movie theaters starting their opening again, we lost a legend in the comics industry. Denny O'Neil, at the ripe old age of 81, passed away. Many of you will know Denny O'Neil from obviously Batman and his his DC tenure, but I was doing some back research. I had forgotten he was so pivotal in the early days of Marvel, and especially in reviving Professor X as a character in the X-Men pantheon, and just sort of being a key man, if you will, in that stage of Marvel's success. So definitely go back, read some Denny O'Neil books, dive into that guy's catalog, because we talk about current creators a lot. It's obviously Hickman and Morrison and all those guys, but like Denny O'Neil, you don't get to Hickman, you don't get to Kirkman without Denny O'Neil. And you don't get to the Batman we know today without Denny O'Neil, obviously. So, go back. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that other than.
No, I'm glad you brought it up, because you told me you had some current news, and to be honest, that was not the news I was expecting. No? But I mean, I had heard that news last week. Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. We are recording this on the day that Joel Schumacher passed away.
Yes,
another who also has his thumbprint on the Batman legacy. And we also got other news today, which is that Michael Keaton is in talks to be Batman in Flash movies.
This is news to me.
From the DC. I was holding this back because I didn't know if you'd seen it, because I saw it before we hit record. They're apparently in talks to have him come in and play Batman when they take the CW series Flash into a movie.
Oh my God, that's genius! I thought you were gonna say there's news that Michael Keaton actually whispered "I'm Batman" to what the hell is the kid who plays Spider-Man? Tom Holland on set, because I was reading that on Reddit earlier. I was like, well, that's kind of fun, Michael Keaton teasing Tom Holland. But holy crap, that. Everybody, of all the things that people have wanted that I have been 100% on board for, it's finding some way to do like the Batman Beyond Bruce Wayne with Michael Keaton, where he's that sort of like wizened old, he's out of the suit, but he's staying behind. He's basically like the mentor to like the new, whoever the new Batman is.
Well, I just literally, we got this news like moments before you and I did our call. And so I was just quickly searching for headlines and stuff, and at least some of the speculation is like, hey, is this a hint at how DC movies may go? Which would make total sense, because the CW, is it CW or WB? I don't have any idea.
CW.
Those shows are such a different tone than the DC movies, and honestly, probably more popular. So why not capitalize on that and make that your cinematic universe, rather than forcing the Zack Snyder. Yeah.
Well, you can rewrite some wrongs too, right?
Oh yeah.
the whole Flashpoint and resetting and merging of universes, like that's much more a DC thing than a Marvel thing. Marvel's done it, but DC's known for like the different universes and collapsing them together and bringing them back again and having different people from different universes show up. Like that's a DC thing. They have yet to, I mean, the TV side has embraced it by even like the most recent Crisis event. They were actually able to bring in like Black Lightning and some of these sort of adjacent characters. And then they even brought in freaking what's his face from Smallville. I forget the actor's name. He and the Lois actress. They brought them in, you know, from a previous network even. So like, and Greg Berlanti knows what he's doing. He's kind of by all intents and purposes, he should be the Kevin Feige of the DCU. And so this almost might be a backdoor way to sort of have their cake and eat it too, to kind of keep giving him more power, more, you know, kind of more oversight over everything, while also doing all this cool stuff and not making it. And then eventually it will all connect. The TV universe will be just as legitimate as the movies. You know, maybe Ben Affleck doesn't come back. Maybe they find some other way to like, you have Batman. Maybe the Robert Pattinson Batman just gets absorbed in the Justice League somehow.
I just one small correction, because I'm like Googling and searching headlines as we keep fantasizing about this, is that what I forgot, or like what I did not have in my head exactly, is the difference between the two Flash actors. Apparently they're making a Flash movie with Ezra Miller, who is actually from the movie. And that's what Keaton's in talks to be in.
But you know what?
So it was just that other speculative headline of like, you know, some blogger or somebody saying, hey, what if this changes, you know, pivots the DC movies? But in the most recent Crisis, one of the best Easter eggs was having the Ezra Miller Flash meet the TV Flash. Like he shows up in the episode. And so they've already established that there is connective tissue if they want it. It's there. It's not going to be weird. Most of the fans will love it. So there is a chance that there's a way they can make that all work. And maybe that Ezra Miller Flash movie has been on the shelf for so long, with so many different directors attached and unattached, and poor Ezra's just sitting there waiting his turn. It may end up being all for the best by making it. By the time they get to it, DC will have like gone through all this like trial and error nonsense. They'll have figured out what works best. You know, the Wonder Womans and Aquamans of the world have sort of like laid the tracks for what the DCU should be, as has the TV side. And they can really make that Flash movie fix a lot of stuff if they want it to. And so if Michael Keaton shows up, holy crap, then anything's possible. Anything could happen. That could be, oh my God, that could be. And Ezra Miller is just delightful. You know, I just keep thinking of the this quote that I've said many, many times. I also have said I don't know to whom to attribute it, and I don't know how true it is today. But some writer or creator had once said, you know, the DC universe is like, it's so great to be a creator in that universe because you get to create like with their property. It's a creator's paradise. Yeah. Because you're working with the iconic characters and you can pitch stories that don't have to be canon. Yeah. Whereas the Marvel is like a fan's paradise because they're constantly trying to work to make everything canonical. So if you wanted, you could, you know, sit down and read every X-Men book and it would all connect in some weird way that you justify to yourself, I guess. But I keep thinking that, like, you know, that is the strength of DC. Like, why not have 3 different Batmans, you know, Affleck, Keaton, and Pattinson, and I don't know, you know. It's interesting you say that. That just no more Jokers. That may explain why I've always felt more pulled towards the DC universe, even as a reader. I just, you know, something about the diversity of creativity and like the way you can, you know, change something and flip something, add something to it. It is much more a melting pot. Whereas I like the framing device. Whereas the Marvel side is much more, we're going to keep this in lockstep so that the fans get as much as they want out of it. But I'm a fan of, you know, changing it up. Like, I mean, one of the reasons I love Doctor Who is because every 4 to 5 years they reset the whole damn thing. And Doctor Who's almost like the best of both worlds in that everything is canon, but then it's like it's never safe. Like anything could happen, even if crap you hate. And then like, if you hate it, just wait another 3 years and they'll change that too. You never know. It's kind of where I am right now after this recent finale. We can talk more about DC and Marvel in a future episode because I'm sure we'll be back next week, kind of back to regular issues. But this episode is the book club, as we mentioned before. Yeah, and if you didn't know, if you haven't, pivot.
A very hard pivot. If you weren't paying attention, we are reading book 1 and 2 of the series March by John Lewis, and or rather written by John Lewis and Andrew Aydin, and illustrated by Nate Powell. Now, before we jump in, I like to start these book club episodes with a little bit of a framing device, or an icebreaker, if you will. And in this particular case, I think a nice question to ask. Now, I gave you a little heads up on this, so I hope you have an answer of sorts. What historical event would you like to see turned into a graphic novel series that hasn't already been adapted?
You did give me a heads up on that, and the one that leapt to mind, which, but of course it's got an asterisk because that's how I work. I'm sorry.
Of course.
I only just heard this has been turned into a graphic novel, which are the events at Tiananmen Square.
Oh, good answer.
I know at our like in this moment in history, and because we are specifically we're inspired to read this book and talk about it because of civil rights issues that we're still dealing with today. That's all that was on my mind. So that was where my mind went first. And then my second answer was I had recently shared with you, like, it's like when The Watchmen was coming out, HBO, I don't even know how we describe this. They sort of commissioned a comic book representation of the events of the Tulsa massacre. Mm-hmm. And so I had shared this link with you where it's like you said, oh, did they make a whole book of this? And I was like, no, it looks like it's just kind of like a sponsored content sort of thing. Like HBO, hired someone to make this, hard to say promotional for The Watchmen, but that I think would work well in a telling like March or Tiananmen Square, like to just lay bare those things. And then of course I just think there's countless historical events. What would you like to see?
I have two answers. The easy one, which kind of a cheat because it has been sort of done, but not in the way I would like it yet, is just the Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison wars. We've seen that in movies and we've seen it touched on in various comics, but not like a true, actual, like historically accurate account, more kind of hinged on Tesla's life. That the mythology of him, I think has gotten a little too unwieldy, as had the mythology of Edison. And it would just be nice to have a more grounded, yet still compelling telling of that. But then I was like, that's the easy answer. One of the things that we'll get into with March is that there is so much history I wasn't aware of or didn't know ran deeper than it did. And so it made me think, what other event in recent history is something that I'm woefully ignorant of? And the one that jumps out at me easily is the Wounded Knee massacre.
Oh, wow.
I'm from South Dakota. We actually, in my hometown, we have a Wounded Knee museum that was installed kind of after I moved, but it's still there. It's open when I'm home. I haven't gone. I have no excuse not to know more about that event. And I think a graphic novel retelling of it would be absolutely appropriate. And, the proceeds could go to help indigenous causes. There could be so much use in something like that. That would be, I think that, as much as I'd love to see a Tesla Edison thing, I think the Wounded Knee book would be much more meaningful and useful.
Well,
so that's mine.
And I'll pitch the book I'd only just read about is called Tiananmen 1989, Our Shattered Hopes. It is by Lun Zhang, and it is on IDW Publishing. So it is out right now.
Excellent.
But very new. The same friend who recommend we up our coverage of creators of color sent me a link to that. So that's how I heard about it. But as we're going to explore in this episode, and as we talked a little bit in our last episode, not that we had to be converted to this view, but we are finding more and more examples of how perfect the comics medium is to tell stories from history. And I'm sure we'll get into that as this episode progresses. We're finding this like a perfect medium for communicating those ideas.
More than anything else, that was my takeaway from both of these books, was that what a great way. I mean, comics, I always get on the soapbox at least once every other episode, but like, It really is. The graphic novel medium, the comics medium, is kind of the perfect medium for history lessons, because you can go at your own pace. You can, the creators can make it as visceral or as, interpretive as they want. Yeah, I'm thinking we mentioned, or we name checked rather. They Called Us Enemies by George Takei on last episode. And that's a great example of a sort of a softer look, because it's kind of from the point of view of George as a child. So everything kind of has a happier, sort of softer sheen to it, even though the events themselves are terrible. Whereas March, as we'll find, really, it's visceral, it's kinetic. It pulls you in such a way that I don't think a documentary could. And I've seen quite a few on the 60s. A movie couldn't. There's something about this, and maybe it's just this particular team that does it well, but it was so enlightening and so I'm so happy that happy's probably not the best word. I'm so grateful that I read it now during like the current moment we're in, because it's so relevant, but just it was a great way to get caught up on the civil rights movement, on what African Americans have experienced in this country, who's brought them from here to now, and just how much progress has been made. Like, the current moment, there's a lot still to do, a lot of work to do, but good God, neither of us were alive in the 60s when this was happening, and it was just such a slap in the face to see how much it changed from like 1961 to when I was born in 81. That's 20 years. I'm celebrating this summer my 20th high school reunion. And in the 20 years since I graduated high school, a lot has changed in terms of technology and entertainment, but more or less the world is kind of what it was then. It wouldn't be that different if I had time travel back in time. A lot of the sensibility was still the same. You go back from 1981 to 1961, holy crap. Especially if you're in the Southeast. Oh my God. It was just such an eye-opening and just very informative experience. Did you have the same, when you read, did it hit you that same way? Did it really feel like you were living history as you were reading this?
Well, yeah. And as again, hopefully we'll get into, I don't want to like throw everything out all at once, but I think, you and I have talked about some things offline, and first of all, I grew up in Nashville, knew that a lot of significant events related to civil rights had happened in Nashville, but didn't have that historical understanding of they didn't also happen in Memphis or Atlanta, or, it's like, to me, it was like, I know there are historical locations in Nashville. I didn't understand that was the center of like the student nonviolent committee. I didn't understand what a center it was to civil rights, which speaks both to my ignorance and privilege, and also the systems around me that didn't educate me to that.
That's okay. That's the most relevant point of all. There were several times I cursed my education by just like, I'm like, I should know this. I should already know this. And just the fact that it was either treated, sparingly or not at all through my K-12 and beyond education is just, that was depressing to kind of consider. And the fact that it took a graphic novel to bring me up to speed where education had kind of failed. I mean, it's one more argument why these books should be part of a history class. They should be required read. I mean, giving kids, middle school kids or high school kids, these 3 books, and we're only going to talk about books 1 and 2, but it is a 3-book series. Yeah. Giving kids these 3 books would have done so much more. I mean, like, it would have been so much more informative to have being handed this. It blows me away that I was not given this already. And you lived in Nashville.
I love that you said that too, because first of all, I now have a list of people to give this to.
Yeah, same.
Like, I am going to buy the 3-volume set, with like the physical one, and give a copy to my brother. Like, give this to your kids, when they're old enough to appreciate it, and because it's an education unlike anything you're going to get. Like, even if your school did cover civil rights. And this goes back, I think, to the point you're making on the comics medium and portraying historical events, is that a lot of times when we learn history in school, we're hearing about the events. Oh, there was a sit-in at this luncheonette downtown. There was a march down here on Broadway. It's like you're hearing locations and dates.
Yeah.
You're not that story and that experience of being able to flip through the pages at your own speed and absorb it at your own speed. And to me, the reading this as well as other, nonfiction comics that we've read is like it just lets me focus in a way where it's no longer like how do I want to say this? The medium of March, the artwork is familiar to me as a comic book. So I don't feel like I'm looking at historical footage like I might in a documentary. And I don't get the experience that I'm just looking at like dates and places like I would in a history book. It's alive to me in that way of like, this is a permanently alive telling of this, of the series of events. And I think, again, something we have to touch on is that the autobiographical nature of this being told from John Lewis's perspective is immensely powerful. And, that's, just again, my ignorance and privilege coming to light, which is, I was aware of him and only during the last, 4 years have I learned like what an historical significantly person that is in, he's a congressman, right?
Yep. Still congressman.
Okay. Yeah. I was about to say senator, but I was like, no, I think he's a congressman. Yeah.
And he's one of those people who, there was like six African-American guys and many others, but sort of six that were sort of the figureheads of the movement, he being the youngest one. And he's the only one who's still alive. Again, as I was reading through this, the thing that just struck me, I'm like, he's almost like a folk hero who's still alive. He's there. Like we should be way happier the fact that there's still a living connection who was absolutely, he wasn't like some kind of like, person, adjacent to the movement. He was there. He was one of the original people doing the sit-ins, leading the movement, like representing the youth, the African-American youth of the time. And he's, this is his story as much as it is, the civil rights story. And it's all kind of intertwined. The thing that I want to really point out before we continue on too far is the team behind this is John Lewis himself, the author, and he partnered. It was very interesting to see who he partnered with on this. His co-writer, and by co-writer, I think it's more of like an editor, just taking John Lewis's story and translating it, adapting it to the comics medium. A gentleman named Andrew, either Aydin or Aydin, I forget how he pronounces it. Interesting to note, white guy, age 36. And then illustrating this is Nate Powell, who you may remember from a previous episode. He actually is the illustrator behind the book You Don't Say, which is the first time I discovered the Tulsa Massacre. That's Nate Powell. I'm like, as I was reading through this, I'm like, why does this look so familiar?
Wow.
It didn't even, the name didn't even, because it wouldn't have occurred to me that another pasty white guy, age 41, would have been the illustrator behind this work. But then I'm like, of course, Nate Powell, he already has a sensitivity to these issues, to this movement. So it's just interesting that John Lewis, being much, much older, partnered with two younger white guys to really translate the story. And the results are spectacular. These two guys knew exactly how to take that story, draw it, translate it, and kind of harness it in the exact right way. And it's amazing that happened with this team.
Yeah. And at least the story I got from Wikipedia on that was that Aydin was an aide to Congressman Lewis.
Oh, that makes sense.
And also a comics fan. Like he was a telecommunications and technology policy aide.
Okay.
And so he went after Lewis had sort of related to him a lot of these events in this first person. He was the one who said, you should write this into a comic book because that will like deliver this, this story in such a powerful way. And it's undeniable that it is. It's,
Well, and shout out to Top Shelf Productions for being the publisher behind this. Like that was a little surprising to see too, because this seems like there's other publishers who are sort of better known for these sort of literary graphic novels, and not that Top Shelf is not a quality publisher, but it was just great to see them embrace this as they have and put the money behind it and allow it to be 3 separate books, which I think was important. Let's talk about that real quick, because we're just talking about books 1 and 2 on this episode. There is a 3rd book, and we kind of made the deliberate choice to just do books 1 and 2 for this reason more than any other, in that book 1 is the kind of the origin story, the new hope, if you will, of the John Lewis experience. It's his childhood, his kind of upbringing, the things he sees, the way he views racism as a child, and kind of how that shapes him. And then book 2 is him in college as a student, being on the front lines of the civil rights movement and inventing a lot of it as they go. It's not like it's not like Martin Luther King was, had been running it for 5 years and he showed up. John Lewis is there in a lot of ways before King even was.
King was not part of that student nonviolent coordinating committee. But they were drawing on ideas from him, and there's several different pages where it's mentioned, but I love that they had this philosophical foundation for it, where they were looking to other nonviolent movements, and they had this whole, the heart of this was already developed.
Well, and then book 3 picks up. Book 2 ends on a very, very tragic cliffhanger, and book 3 is not that you definitely go buy book 3. We actually kind of wanted to focus more on book 2, because there's events and story in book 2 that I didn't know, that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. A lot of what happens in book 3, we actually kind of are aware of. That doesn't make it any less important. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have it as part of the collection. But we wanted to, I think if we included that, we would have had less time to talk about books 1 and 2. And I think because we're more familiar with the events of book 3, we want to let you as the reader just take that in as you will. You don't have to hear us talk about it necessarily.
And I don't think there's any way to separate each one of these books. Like there's no way to say, hey, just go read 3 or just go read, like you need to read the whole thing. And they are very immersive. I read both volumes 1 and volume 2. Maybe I split up 2, but I think it was almost a single sitting for both, where, and it was intense, but once I was into it, it was like, I don't want to stop in the middle of this. I do think I had to stop in the middle of book 2 and was, frustrated, like, oh no, I got to get back to it. And I've since had to stop in the middle of book 3, but it's so absorbing in that way that, I would definitely say, like, there's no way to split them up. But I totally agree with your focus on book 2, especially in how you preface this whole episode, in how you and I grew up and knew, historical things or stories or whatever, and just didn't know all the facts. Like, before you and I started talking, you said book 2 covers these events you may know of, but they need a more light shown on them.
Yeah. You may have heard about some of these things, but you weren't there. Like, these books put you there. I want to give more shout out to Nate Powell before we get into the story a little bit deeper. As I said, Nate Powell, exceptionally talented illustrator. He is behind the sort of anthology series I mentioned on a last episode, You Don't Say. Highly recommend that. This is honestly the perfect art for this story. I was thinking, like, who else, if this was illustrated by somebody else, would it have been better, worse? I can't think of a single other illustrator who could have brought to this story what Nate Powell does. It's all in black and white, beautiful black and white illustrations. And the way, it's not, Nate Powell has this great way of drawing where it's not panels and squares. A lot of it's layered illustrations. They connect together. Sometimes he uses a grid system when it's absolutely necessary, but most of the time it's layers, and it's a lot of negative space, and just he uses the medium so perfectly. So in the case of this story, it's there's a lot of daytime and nighttime, and so he's able to really bring you into a sense of time and place by just shifting the page color from black to white, which obviously has deeper context anyway. Yeah. Or subtext, I should say. But there's a kinetic nature to how he draws, where you feel motion, you feel the characters reacting. You feel it's less drawing characters accurately. I mean, they're very well drawn. Like, the people look like the actual people they're meant to represent. I think if I read correctly, he drew over 300 different characters that were featured in some way, shape, or form through the whole series. So just that alone's a feet of nature. But the other thing,
I mean, there's such great scenes of like where all the leaders are pictured around a table, or I'm looking at the thumbnails of book 2 right now, and where on the title page there's a lineup of them where you get the like characterization of each person in there. That Powell has done such a good job of like characterizing each one of them. Like they're distinct, He
knows what to focus on. That's really what I'm trying to say. He knows what to focus on, and in such a way, there's an efficiency to his illustrations that nothing is really wasted. You see, instead of having like a gang of white racists, and you'll see them, say slanderous things, but he can draw one guy. And I'm thinking of the sheriff from Birmingham. I forget the guy's name. It's the sinister guy. He can draw him in such a way that you're just like, you feel the hate coming off that man's skin, and he's a drawing. Like, you just know. You know exactly what that guy's point of view is. You know exactly what John Lewis's point of view is when he's represented, or Martin Luther King. There are times when King is represented earlier on in the movement, and he's a little unsure of himself. He's not the king, the fully realized King we sort of know. King, when he kind of came in, was still kind of, am I the right guy to do this? Should we be doing it this way? Everybody was kind of giving him more and more to do, and he was a little reserved at first. And you see that, you feel that. So Powell can really articulate this incredibly well, and it makes sense too. It's so hard to talk about this without sounding like an idiot, but like it is a good companion piece to his Tulsa story, which was a short story that appeared in You Don't Say, but it really, like, having read and seen that, I could appreciate this even more, because he really gets. He knows how to draw fear. He knows how to draw concern and just hate. And he knows how to draw emotion very, very clearly, very efficiently.
It's one of those things where it's, it's like any great work of art where I kind of want into the behind the scenes story of, like, especially when you think of if the authors were not professional comic book creators, how much did Nate Powell get to shape how this was visually realized? And you talk about the kinetic feeling of it. One of the things that you pick up on in the book is there's a clear break between like what's John Lewis narrating. It's first person. He's telling you the story. In May of 1963, I did this. We went down to this. A lot of times when there is violence in one of those events, which there is a lot in book 2, which is all white people inflicting violence upon black people, at the moment that the violence gets inflicted, there is no dialogue. There's no narration. There are no words. You just see it happen. It's like he says, like, just as we were getting off the bus, and then the next panel is, a boot kicking somebody in the face. And the shock and horror of that, especially in guided view. I don't know if you read it physically, but I read it on Comixology. So,
interesting. Okay.
Having that panel pop up and going, oh my God, it's like there's no words right there. You get connected to that violence. And then, as you mentioned, there are people saying hateful things. There's a visual representation of the sort of mumble and background noise, which is. And it's not always hateful. If there's there'll be scenes of like the church singing, and he will do like a squiggly speech bubble with cursive, with like the words of a hymn in it to show like this is sort of diegetic audio, like this is the sound of the church in here. And then there is the, printed comic book narration of John Lewis, while in the background there's the church choir singing. That also happens a lot during the violent attacks, where the racist epithets that are being shouted are similarly like they're in cursive and they'll sort of fade away. So you just get this feeling of like there's just this background noise of all these people shouting hateful things while this violent act is happening right up front. If it had not been in cursive, if it had been in that print format, or God forbid, like in the Batman, blammo, pow kind of thing, I don't think it would have had the impact. Because in this, it's just like what you're seeing is not the onomatopoeia of the violence. You're seeing the violence, and you're in the background hearing the hate.
This is a great point, because I think more than anybody else, Nate Powell, and shout out to him because he did the illustrations, but he did all the lettering, which a lot of times we don't really shout out the letterers because, frankly, a lot of comics have just sort of standard word bubbles and stuff, and that's fine. And it requires work, but it's not as much a part of the artistic experience. This is the opposite. I mean, like the lettering and his use of when and how to use it, and how it sort of flows from panel to panel and crosses over with other stuff. And then the absence of it, to your point, like when he doesn't have anything. Like I'm looking right now in book 2, there's a page, or actually it's a full spread 2-page scene of a bus on fire, and there's no words, there's nothing there, and you can hear the flames on the bus, and you can hear the rioters in the background. Like he has this way of making you hear the scene and hear the environment that you're in very clearly. Like it required no effort for me at all to like read through this.
Yeah.
And it's one of the many things that pulled me into that world. I could hear and feel, like I could hear birds chirping, like I could hear, smoke, and just it's impressive that could be so visceral.
I love that you brought that up, because another thing he does with that lettering is he'll put, if there is a sound effect, often he'll put the sound effect in the like motion lines of the action. Yeah. And you said that about the panel you were looking at. I was just looking at the one of I guess it's the sheriff. The name you can remember, Bull Connor. Bull Connor. There we go. Where they turn the fire hose on the children who are protesting this. Yeah. And also, while I was looking at this while you were speaking, I had that crazy effect where I tapped out on Comixology, to get the full page. And only then did I realize like everything that was on that single page, where, there's a guy shouting through the bullhorn, disperse or you're going to get wet. And then all of a sudden there's just this violent act of these Alabama cops turning a fire hose on black children. Yeah, and it's like almost all sound effect and action lines, and the figures are reduced to like these little sketchy lines. They're lost in the water, just getting knocked over. And then down to the bottom is Bull Connor's face saying, "Bring the dogs." Yeah. And it's fucking terrifying.
It's interesting because I have both of these physically. Great. And I'm no stranger to Comixology. I love that format. But what's interesting about this book, I just had this realization. Even though you turn pages and your peripheral view you can see everything that's kind of presented. This is probably one of the first books, if not, one of the only books I've read where I am so focused on a panel by panel basis, it almost feels like guided view, where I'm just like, I'm so connected to the scene as it unfolds. I'm not really looking ahead. Nothing's getting spoiled. So when I got to that same page where the fire hoses are unleashed, it hit me in its purest moment as soon as my eyes like saw it in order. Even though I'm like, I turn the page, I can glimpse it, but it didn't really hit me until I saw it. So Nate Powell just has this amazing way to just pull you in. And I will say this, he also has this amazing talent of intercutting between two different simultaneous events, whether it be, one of the framing devices for this story is the election and inauguration of Obama. It starts off with John Lewis, in real time at the inauguration. He's at the Capitol building, kind of meeting and greeting people in his office. He's still a congressman at that time, as he is now. And that's sort of it starts there, and that's sort of the bookends to each book. It's sort of when we need to pull back and kind of reorient the reader, we go back to that quote unquote present day moment of the inauguration of Obama. And so he'll do that, and sometimes he'll have like dialogue in that juxtaposed with events in the past, events during the civil rights movement, or even like two events where like maybe John Lewis is watching TV while we cut to something else, and you never lose your place. You never lose. You never get confused. You never get you never lose track of what's going on. Nate Powell. I don't think I can ever say enough about this guy. He is a true just genius in terms of the comics medium, understanding how to do it and then putting in the work. My God, like there's not a single panel in here that it felt like, oh, he just rushed through that so he could finish the project. Every single thing. It's like he didn't waste a single page, a single panel, or a single dot of ink.
And it's not like, it's not like technically flashy in that way that, yes, we
like
love
Alex
the
Ross.
art.
Or something.
And that's a great example. I was also thinking of, oh my God, East of West.
Nick Dragata.
Dragata, yeah. And how and other Hickman works where it's so graphically designed and perfect, whereas you really get the feeling of like pen and ink and paint. There's like a lot of washes in this that look like almost watercolor or something, and you get that feeling of it. But it is technically amazing in its organization, like in its storytelling, but it's not flashy in that, like, this is a, this is, he's not, I never felt like, oh, this guy is just sitting in Photoshop doing this.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely not.
And as you were talking about the way he works with time, I just flipped forward a couple pages to the scene where they talk about the assassination of Medgar Evers, where Lewis walks into the room and a group of SNCC or SNCC members, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, are watching the news. And it's like from the news, it's almost like pencil drawings on the television screen to them telling Lewis about it in the normal style to this flashback style of like them narrating the events of what happened.
Right?
And it's like, it flips like, I mean, it's very subtle, but it's flipping from like 3 different drawing styles to tell that one little flashback story.
Yes.
And it's just, in the moment, none of that ever really occurred to me. It's only in sort of the zoom out of the book where, after I finished it, it's like, oh my God, that was amazing. And I think that's another thing that allows you to go in and reread the book and like really experience it a different way,
Oh, 100%. Now, in the beginning, I gave the quote, the George Santayana quote, "Those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it." And I think when we talk about the story, the thing that I kept coming back to with that quote in mind was how much the current moment is either learning or forgetting from that moment. Think about activist culture in America right now, and kind of what it has come to represent, and more of the tactics that activist culture has kind of taken on. And maybe you can please disagree if this is your point of view, or if you do disagree, please pipe up. I feel like, especially reading through this, that the current culture of activism has lost 3 key attributes since the 1960s: patience, focus, and thorough research. The thing that they drill it in, like the people that were part of John Lewis's movement, like they sat down, they read through all the laws, they made sure they were absolutely up to speed on every aspect of what they were involved with, so that if they were contacted by the media, or if a white person was trying to basically tell them the law, they knew exactly what their parameters were. And then just this idea of focused patience, like we're going to go and we're going to sit in and we're going to get arrested and we're going to wake up and do it again the next day and the next day and the next day, and we're just going to be as polite and as patient and as reasonable as we can be, so that everything bad that happens is on them. It's not going to be on us. We're just going to keep doing it and just it with maybe no end in sight. I don't see a lot of that in today's activist culture. There are some parts of it, but it feels like we've shifted into a sort of just like, we need it now. Like you get these groups of people who aren't as up to speed, who haven't sort of been through, training, or haven't been through the proper education to understand what they're protesting. They kind of get thrown together, and you can get some results out of this, but I contrast that to this moment in time in the 60s, and I'm like, oh my God, they were disciplined. They were just like, these people were absolutely the ones for their moment. And I don't know if I think we may have lost some of that. I don't know if you agree. It just felt like this felt like a different kind of activism that we have lost touch with today.
Well, I would say I do disagree, but what I draw from what you're saying is that it is such a great look at the nonviolent response to a civil rights crisis in 1960. And we tend, I think, especially in history, to frame it as there was a nonviolent movement, and then there was kind of a violent movement, and or not a violent but a militant movement. Mm-hmm. My response to patience is, well, I mean, it's been 401 years. How fucking patient do Black people have to be in waiting for civil rights? But
then they were, but at that time they were like, I mean,
which I honestly, there were several moments where people, it's a, oh, another name just slipped my mind, but isn't it, Carmichael, who's in the group, who wants them to, fight back if they're hit.
Yeah.
And I found myself sympathizing with that view. Like I can't imagine. I can't imagine being in that situation where you say I'm non-violently going to ride a bus from this place to this place, and the response of the white people in the Deep South is to, plaster paper all over the windows so that you can't see out and keep you in the dark for hours, only letting you out to attack you.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a fucking horror movie.
Yeah.
And the determination not to respond with violence is like foreign to me. And I'm a very pacifist, nonviolent person. It's just like, I can't imagine being caged up like that and not having a violent response to it. More than likely I would have a panic response to it. But
same,
that willpower is amazing.
Part of that though was because, I mean, I attribute a lot of that to when you signed up for this movement, especially as a student, they're like, hey, here's Emerson, here's Gandhi, here's Thoreau. Yeah. Read these people, read these books. You have to be on board with this philosophy or you can't be part of this movement. That, I think, that's the difference, is that there was a very focused, rigid structure that these early groups participated in, and they were they were militant in that if you were caught smoking, if you were caught retaliating anyway, they kicked you out. There's like no. Like, there's another thing later on. King himself makes the point, look, it's not tied to communism or black supremacy. This is an integrated movement. We want everybody. And so and you can see where the Malcolm X's of the world would start to split off. And he even makes a point, like, Malcolm X was not invited to that White House summit. Yeah. Later on in book 2, the sort of the big six kind of guys behind the movement meet with JFK at the White House. And they made a specific point to say, missing from that meeting was Malcolm X, who we didn't really, we appreciate what he was trying to do, but that wasn't what the way we were going about this was not how he wanted to. And, I was familiar with sort of that rift. They often compare Malcolm X and King to, Professor X and Magneto in terms of the ways they go about kind of achieving. They shared the same goal, but they had very different ways to get there. So it's just interesting that I feel like the King era, the King John Lewis era of protesting and organizing has sort of lost way or lost ground to more of the Malcolm X style. And I don't know, I mean, maybe do you think it's because it's so much more, anybody can just go and protest, like you don't have to kind of go through this orientation period? Is that part of it? Or do you think it was just a different mindset of the time? That was the thing that I kind of came away with most, not confused by, but just like I just kept wondering. I'm like, how did we get from there to this when that, a lot of people died, a lot of people went to jail many times, were beaten, but look at what they achieved. Is that something we should be so quick to dismiss now? I don't know.
I don't, after 400 years, I don't know how you make the point anymore. I had just watched this, amazing, I would call it a testimonial from Kimberly Jones, a Black author, where she describes this, the why are they rioting in their own neighborhood kind of accusation. And the way she explains is like, look, it's, we're here for hundreds of years when we were literally slaves and could not own anything. Yeah. Then we built up these places like in Tulsa, and you just burned it down. Yeah. So imagine playing 400 games of Monopoly and saying you don't get to own anything. You can't buy any property, and all the money you make goes to the same person. Then you play 50 games where you can build up some money and they just take it all away from you. Like, it's, the game has always been rigged, and riots don't burn down the place that they own because they never owned anything. They weren't allowed to. And so I But that's interesting that you read it with, because obviously there's no way to read it without thinking of this moment that we're in.
Oh, not at all.
What I kept thinking of during the recent wave of protests is actually how peaceful it had been at after a spot. It seemed like there were reports of there's a real clear break to me that I saw, and I could be, this is just totally subjective, I'm sure, but the news reports of violence, rioting, looting seemed to me to break after the day of George Floyd's memorial. Mm-hmm. And the other big event I saw taking place in those days was when we started getting news reports of police reaching out to the protesters and, kneeling with them, telling them their story, walking with them, doing, anything like that. It's like, if the police always present this side of like, you're against us, then you're just going to encourage that rioting, looting kind of thing. I don't think any of the actual protesters are doing that looting and rioting. I think those are, anarchic elements that like come from outside. Yeah. But there was also the other thing. The other thing we're missing is that this is focused on the nonviolent side of it. And I would be really interested to read an historical like documentation of the militant response to white
Malcolm
supremacy.
X version of the story.
And also just to, just to make sure that we don't stick to the kind of popular history. Malcolm X did reject the that response, I believe. Mm-hmm. I believe like he like later in his life he's please correct me if I'm wrong, and listeners as well. Like, but I think he broke with I'm not really sure if it was with the Nation of Islam or with another leader. Mm-hmm. I just watched an old a clip of him on this white people conservative show where he very calmly explained to these white people like what he was saying. And so but yeah, another fact that jumps to mind that I saw this week was like the only time the NRA supported an assault weapons ban was when the Black Panthers showed up with assault weapons on the steps of the California state government building, whatever it was.
It's funny you say that. We were actually, before we went to Rachel and I flew to California a week ago, and the night before we were actually watching a Black Panthers documentary, I think on PBS or some of those, and I learned that exact fact was where I learned that. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. The thing that really, I think that if there's another theme that penetrates this entire book, it can be summed up. There's a quote later on by John Lewis himself where he says, "I deeply believe that our discipline paved the road to our success." Yeah. And he says that about the movement, but I took that as much about him as a person. Like if you track his story, and it starts, the book one gives you a lot of his childhood and sort of, how he grew up, what he saw, his interactions with white people and vice versa. All the things that brought him to the first sit-ins that he participated in as a student in Nashville, that discipline, like that ability to get up and do it again and do it again. That guy went to jail so many times and was beaten to half to death so many times, to then just get up and do it again and stay committed and stay disciplined about it, and do it with the other thing to really make sure we mention, to do it with the most dignity I have ever seen any group of people bring to any discussion. I mean, he dressed up in the suit and he went and they just did it like, again, no smoking, no swearing. Like, we are going to hold our heads high and just come back again and again and again and again to where it's almost inevitable. Like that discipline, I couldn't do that. Like It would have to really be life or death for me to even get close to that. And the fact that here's this 20-year-old kid doing this, because no one else would, and his experiences in life brought him to that moment. That's why it's important to get to book one, because you kind of need to know how a person is shaped that way to be that person at that time. Like that's important. Oh
man, I'm so glad you said. I was about to interject exactly the same thing of like in book one. You see John Lewis as what his parents and family thought was going to be this like young minister. They were sure that like that was his calling, was like he preached a sermon when he was 16, and he so when he went to Nashville, it was to a Baptist college, I think. Sorry, I can't remember that.
Fisk University.
Well,
wasn't
didn't he go to like the I
Oh
thought
yeah,
he
yeah.
came here
You're
for
right.
something else, right?
You're right. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it's and maybe this is, I don't know how if this is germane to the conversation or not, but I think a lot of that discipline and that approach that they took was very much informed by their religious views. And what I took away, like as I was reading it, was just almost the obstinance to continue those religious views when you're clashing with white supremacists who claim to share the same religious views, which is probably a discussion for a completely different podcast. But, they were really taking what they saw as like the Christian approach to turn the other cheek and, to be the nonviolent counter. But I mean, we really can't say enough about how violent the Deep South was.
Oh my God.
And
Yes.
one of the other things that struck me is, which struck me in like a way that has never struck me reading other history, is doing the subtraction between my date of birth and like the death of Martin Luther King or some of these other events, and going, you know what, this happened about a decade before I was born.
Yes.
Some of these events.
Yeah.
And then thinking back now to a decade ago and going like, wow, a decade ago we had our first black president, and now we're still having the protests and the civil unrest and like, the arguably most racist president we've ever had, I guess, or that can't be true. I mean, we must have had 100 years of racist presidents or more, but a modern racist like we have not seen, in my lifetime. And think like, oh, I don't think of 10 years ago as being that long ago now that I'm in my 40s.
But think about this. Say what you will about Trump, but he's not getting on the Capitol steps yelling segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, which is what George Wallace did when he ran for governor and won. Like that was his acceptance speech. Like it was so. I mean, we hear in the modern context like how racist the South used to be. I like your kind of jumping around, counting down the days between your birth and this. That was what I was kind of saying in the beginning. Like 20 years passed between 61 and my birthday.
Yeah.
And in that time, we went from a place where like you couldn't even like be in the same room with a black person. You'd go to jail. Let's not even talk about like interracial marriage. Like all that was still to come. But like just that people were openly like proudly just like not on my watch and just like doing the most malicious things. And like by the time I was a kid, like all of that had if maybe it was suppressed, but it wasn't on full display like it was in the telling of this book. So there was this feeling that crept over me while I was reading this, like, my God, it was not that long ago. There are people that were Strom Thurmond, who was almost, which is he was still a sitting senator or sitting senator. By the time I was in high school, he was still in there. Like that guy, just like John Lewis, he was there then. He was one of the bad guys. It would be like, I hate to use this comparison, but like it would be like the rebels beat the Empire, right? And let's say Grand Moff Tarkin was just still around afterwards and was just like still hanging out.
Still in the Senate. Yeah,
still in the Senate. It's like you're Grand Moff Tarkin. You were like, what the hell? So like there was a dissonance, I think is the right word. A dissonance in reading this and trying to really like, this is not fiction. And so many of these events, like I'll pick out, I loved your reference to the one when they were riding the bus from Nashville to Birmingham and they made them stay on the bus and they started blacking out the windows. That was horrifying. And it was like, I had to tell myself that was real. That happened. This is not because you kind of get caught up in sort of the drama of the events and you sort of almost convince yourself, oh, this is just fiction. No. This is real. This happened. It's happened not long ago.
Well, and there is a generational attitude, not in our generation, but in our parents or the generation in between us or something of, well, after the civil rights struggle, everything was fixed, as though in 1969 it was all fine. Yeah. And what you and I are both getting at is like, it wasn't that long ago that this was so, seen as so wrong. And Strom Thurmond is like such a great example of like, how did they not, the fact that they didn't kick that guy out shows you that like, it wasn't fixed. Like, this did not get solved in one little, like, like there were eruptions of violence and then everything was hunky dory. Like they're still trying to disenfranchise Black voters and people of color all over the country. And another thing, all of this, put in my mind was like, it is this total rejection of the Republican and libertarian view that, people will ultimately do the right thing, like at the smallest level. Like it's very subtle, but there are some great points of like, the federal government needs to step in because people are literally not equal in Alabama and Mississippi, and they're never going to correct their voting system. I mean, the literacy tests for Black voters and just the bullshit that they put them through just to register to vote. Like, of course they can't change the system. It's like Kimberly Jones said, the game was always fixed. And seeing all that and going like, Jesus Christ, this was like, 10, 11 years before I was born. Which I knew, I knew, but I'm just saying like that visceral connection to this book and like the way it put the story right, let me stew in the story as long as I needed to stew to like really take that in was what was so magnificent about this book.
Can I pitch you something that just occurred to me while you were talking? That was a great little point. And I like stewing in it. I think is the real reason why this is the perfect medium for this sort of history. But then something occurred to me. Tell me if this sounds reasonable. I think one of the problems with our current moment and why, there's a lot of people joining the protests, throwing their support, like saying, I'm actually heartened by how many people had no hesitation to say, I stand with just all of this. There's a lot of other people who aren't opposing it, but they're sort of middling and just kind of confused by all of this. And, like, why are we protesting? I almost wonder if the events of the civil rights movement that are in these books, represented in these books, were so bad, and there's people who are very much alive, who were alive then, who were maybe children or young adults when this was going on, and this was so horrific that cops killing Black men is a big problem, but we're not seeing actual, we're not seeing 1,000 Black children, sprayed with water and attacked by dogs just cause, right? We're not seeing that right now. So I'm almost wondering if the events of the civil rights movement were so bad that by comparison, people are looking at it, and because it's not as bad now, they're like, well, it seems fine to me. And they're not going that next level deeper. Do you think it's because the contrast was so great that there were so many just, dyed in the wool racists walking around proudly saying, like, not in Birmingham, like we're going to bomb a church to make it not here. Do you think that's why there is kind of a disconnect, that there are some people who are still like, I don't know what's going on. Why is this a problem? I thought Black people were doing fine. Like, I wonder if it's because, we have come a long way. There's still a lot of work to do, but what John Lewis had to go through was so intense that it kind of casts this numbness, I think, over maybe a good chunk of the population where they just can't, they think that was almost like going to war. Like, I saw everything after that almost seems pale by comparison, even though it's not. Does that make sense? Am I crazy?
And I don't think you're crazy. And I think that's what, like, it's like there's a series of those events. It's like the Civil War ends and the, white supremacists, which are just the white people who got to make all the laws, go, okay, we fixed it. Like the Civil War's over, we're done with that. But that's not exactly true. Like, if you didn't deal with it correctly, I just read it's so dumb to say I read a series of tweets, but I read a threaded, story from this historian, Jared Yates Sexton, who talked about how the Reconstruction was actually just totally bungled because it was basically left in the hands of a white supremacist, like another, like, it's in the hands of Johnson, I guess. Right. It's, a Southerner who was Lincoln's vice president. And so he didn't really care about fixing it. I mean, the holiday that we just had to force people to celebrate, Juneteenth, is not actually the date on which the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. It is the date 2 years later when they finally told the slaves in Texas that they were free.
Wow.
Because Texas kept that fucking information from all the people that remained enslaved after the Civil War. Like, oh, dude, I don't even know where I was going with that. But it just, it's a series of horrible events that everyone wants to like just sort of turn their mind off of after it's done, you know? And I think that's what the generation that lived through all that terrible conflict wanted to turn it off. But you know what? No president was elected to lead the country to heal them. They elected fucking Richard Nixon, who 4 years later, you know, like basically tries to steal the election himself in this series of dirtbag botched robberies, you know, in the Watergate. Back when, you know, there were a few Republicans who like had spine enough to stand up and tell him like, you're going to get impeached, get the fuck out. And now we're still reliving that same horror. And it's cool that you quoted Santayana. Was that how you say it? Santayana?
Oh, Santayana. Yes. Thank you.
Because when you told that to me before the show, I thought of Kurt Vonnegut's response, which is, I got news for you. We're doomed to repeat the past no matter what. That's what it means to be alive.
Follow-up. Yeah.
And I think is where we are now. You know, I just a couple weeks ago read this thing about, you know, Trump is not the new Nixon. He is the new George Wallace. Like he's saying the secret stuff out loud. You know, he just had a rally where he referred to all the protesters as animals, you know, which used to be this sort of racial code word, and I think still is to an extent. So it's, you're right. He's not getting up and saying, hey, segregation. But you think of like the first time his name ever appeared in print was because of that, like in the Trump, you know, like in the 1970s or whatever, he was sued for that racial discrimination. He and his father, you know, so it's like this dude's whole fucking career started in the media with what a racist he was. And here he is, you know, still trying to use those code words. And it's, I mean, what other moment? I mean, what, you know, like read this book, you know, like read all these books. Like it's, you know, you can hear the exasperation in my voice and stuff. And some of that exasperation is not good, righteous anger with the situation. Some of it is shame and embarrassment. And I only last week learned that like the high school I went to removed a statue to a Confederate soldier that evidently had been up there for 100-something years. And so the whole time I went to school, just didn't even think about it. Like, oh yeah, of course we got a Confederate soldier statue here. Like that's fucking outrageous.
You mentioned shame, and like one of the things, and kind of trying to end on a more positive note in this story, because this is a heavy book, a heavy two books, I should say. Book one, a little lighter just because it's you know, John Lewis's childhood, but book two is heavy. But one of the things I was so glad to see was, and I forget where it is. I think it's towards the middle. It's one of the many times John Lewis gets arrested. Oh yeah, it is. It's almost exactly in the middle. And it's probably the most dehumanizing arrest. They send John and a bunch of people to, I'm on it right now. It's Perchman Farm.
Yeah.
Which is Mississippi State Penitentiary. All the jails had gotten so full, and this group of people had I think they refused to post bail because they didn't want to hand money to a system that just kept oppressing them. Like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to post bail. We're just screw that. And so they basically got sent up to Parchman Farm, which was almost exactly a recreation of, you know, like the slave barracks of the Deep South. They stripped them naked. They made them go into the shower. And these guys just kept singing. They kept singing spirituals and hymns. And they made a specific point to say, like, you can take anything, but you're not going to take our souls. And at some point, you know, the guards get so angry and annoyed at them singing, like, if you keep singing, we're going to take your mattresses. They're like, take our mattresses. That's fine. You're not going to take our souls. And there's a particular guy, Jim Bevel. I wrote in here, we all need a Jim Bevel in our life. When they're standing in the line, buck ass naked, and there's some white guys with them too, because there were some white protesters who joined these movements and were put in jail right with the African American guys. But they're all naked, they're buck ass naked, standing in line, being handed their prison uniforms, and one of the guys notices that they're not giving them underwear, and they're like, "Oh God, you're not even any underwear." Jim Bevel, always colorful. Jim Lewis goes, always colorful. Jim Bevel helped keep it in perspective. Jim Bevel, while in line, looks at the guys and says, "What's this hang-up about clothes? Gandhi wrapped a rag around his balls and brought down the whole British Empire." Like that sort of like just spitting in the face of oppression. Like, you're not going to take we're going to still have fun. We're going to sing. We're going to you're not going to take our dignity and you're not going to take our souls. We're going to outlast you. That, I think, that's why they won the civil rights movement. That's why we had a black president in Barack. Like, it's that you're not going to take our souls. You can take anything else. Yeah. And just I loved seeing the increasing frustration and consternation of the white prison guards and all the racists they had to deal with, thinking that, if we just make them post bail, and these guys to the end, no, you're not going to do that. Take our toothbrushes. That's fine. We're just going to keep at it.
Yeah. And maybe what you were saying earlier about that, like seeing current day protest movements and not knowing exactly how to frame it historically. What we see in this is just that spirit of it's just they embodied their mission so fully.
Well, and what you notice, real quick, what you notice though is that what the racists really wanted was to crush their spirit. Exactly. That's what they really wanted. And no matter what they tried, it just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and there's a great panel of the Alabama cop kneeling before the little black girl, and he's like, "What do you want?" And she says, "Freedom."
Yeah.
And there are several signs of Dr. King saying something similar. I also want to point out one other thing that's subtle and jumps back to our art thing is there's a great way that Powell almost always shows you the Confederate flag on the policemen's uniforms.
I never noticed that.
Oh my gosh. It's on every shoulder of every cop.
Oh my God.
You realize that it's a historical detail and I think you see the racist symbolism of it.
Oh my God, you're right.
So
I never noticed it
so well. And that's that thing that I know I've brought up in rants before, but historically the Confederate flag wasn't really seen between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. It came back to the South as a symbol of white supremacy during the Civil Rights Movement. So it's really difficult to have conversations with an older generation. Like my parents, they remember it when they were kids, but that's because the racists brought it back then. Mm-hmm. If my parents were 10 years older, they might have seen this abrupt, wait, why is this Confederate flag back? Well, at least this is the history I understand is that, if you might not have seen it that much, or at least definitely not out of the Deep South, between the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. But I mean, my God, what else can we say? This is such a powerful book, and it's
unbelievable. And by book 3, we again, we wanted to focus a little bit more on some of the stuff in book 2, just because it was so there was so much. But definitely complete the trilogy, get all 3 of them. And it really. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
We've alluded to several of the big events that we wanted to shine light on in this, but I don't think we didn't name what that cliffhanger is, and that is that book 2 ends on the Birmingham church bombing, which killed 4 little girls.
Yep.
And it is so horrific, and it's literally the last frame of the book is just that smoke, just maybe you get a little bit of afterward, but verifying now, no, you don't. You see the last panel is that phone off the hook,
which is an incredibly powerful place to end that. And I mean, I waited a day and then I went and bought book 3 immediately. Not that I wasn't gonna, but I'm like,
Yeah.
my life has to end on
stew.
a hopeful note. Like this can't be the last thing I read, for the next week or two. So I had to go grab that book 3, which is kind of what we want you listeners and fellow readers to do, and just complete the story arc.
Yeah. And I will say, I didn't read it back to back.
Oh.
Even though I talked about how I would read book 1 in one sitting and then went to the next book and almost did it in one sitting, it was still like I took days off in between. It was like I read book 1 and then I just like let it breathe for a week, and then read book 2 and let it breathe for a couple days. But I had that same reaction. Like when this ended, I was like, instantly downloaded book 3, even if I didn't start it right away. It was like I don't know what to do with that discomfort right there.
That's a great point. Actually, I would encourage and
it's a really nice slipcase edition to get all 3.
Yeah, that's true. I wish I had done what you did and give it more space. I was so enthralled, but it hurts your spirit to get through some of the stuff, because again, it actually happened it happened in this country, and the guy that's telling the story is still alive. He's still out there. He should be a goddamn folk hero. Just from this alone, like you hear about Johnny Appleseed and John Henry, and John Lewis, I wish so badly I had known this story in this way 20 years ago, especially when I was in Nashville. I would have gone to all these places and just considered, because a lot of these places are still there. The First Baptist Church in Nashville is there. Some of the the places where they did some of their sit-ins are still there. That's hugely important. It's worth going and sitting and experiencing and being like, this is where all this occurred, and not that long ago. Just incredible. I can't say enough about how this medium, just history comes alive. And I know that that's sort of a trite, tired phrase, but it's so true. I haven't felt history this visceral and this kinetic, I don't think, ever. And I just now I'm glad you recommended Tiananmen, because I'm almost now on this kick where I just want to go consume all history this way.
Honestly, my eye went immediately to the Guy Delisle books, especially the unread one on my shelf, where it was like I don't know how to go back to fiction right now, although I know that when I turn on Netflix, it's like I got to push fiction into my brain because there's too much reality.
Yeah.
But maybe this is a good place to plug this. I wanted to plug a book, because you and I have been talking over the past several weeks about, trying to be more consciously reading books by creators of color. And I picked up this volume 1 of a book called Livewire, which is by an author named Vita Ayala. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And they identify as a non-binary Afro-Latinx writer. And it was a very cool thing, because I had seen a tweet about it when it came out, and instantly, reactionarily went to Comixology to check it out, and fortunately did not pull the trigger, because then I realized that it was for sale on a website called drivethroughcomics.com.
Oh.
And actually, I think I bought it on drivethroughRPG.com. But anyway, on that, it's probably in both places, same company, obviously. All of the proceeds there were being donated by the creators. And it is a crazy, I wouldn't call it a superhero book. It's like a techno powers sci-fi, futuristic modern kind of story. And I wanted to plug it because I was like, hey, we don't plug enough stuff like this. And I know you can pick it up somewhere and do some good, with your purchase. So I got a PDF version of it, and, it's easy to read. And I use an app called Panels, but I'm also reading it in, I use an app called Panels to read indie books that I buy that way. But I'm just reading this in a Documents by Readle app. So, not feeling like I'm missing any of the Comixology experience. And fortunately my purchase got to, go somewhere useful.
Heck yeah, man. The cover art looks amazing. I've just added this to my bookmark list as well. So I appreciate that. This would have it's Valiant too. That's interesting. This would have totally gone under my radar.
Yeah. But for the focus that we or like consciously trying to have on ourselves now, driven by a good friend telling me like, hey, you guys should do this. Like,
yeah.
I'm keeping my eye open. I definitely want to like us to talk about it when we see cool books by creators of color that don't necessarily have to be a heavy history read,
That's
like
true.
This is a fun techno sci-fi read.
I'm glad you said that, because that is the temptation after reading something like March, is like, let's find more stories like, I mean, and in some ways I was sort of when I said I want to see a graphic novel of the Wounded Knee incident, I was kind of playing into that, which I do, but it can be a little seductive to think that's all this should be about. It's like, no, that's important, but so is just straight up fiction by, creators of diverse creators. Like, that's just as important.
Exactly. Yeah. For sure. So that's my pitch. We're getting back to comic, like just non-political historical comic books next week, and we're talking about two of our favorite new books, Decorum by Jonathan Hickman and Mercy by Mirka darn, what is her last name?
You almost had it.
Andolfini. Yeah.
Andolfo. There we go.
Yeah. Mirka Andolfo. That's correct, right?
Yep, no, that's right. We'll be back.
It's not necessarily a book club where you have to have read the 2 issues that exist of both these books, but if you do, you'll enjoy it all the more.
And if you read March with us, or even if you haven't, go pick up books 1 and 2. Let us know what you thought. If there was something we had a take that you either loved or hated, that's awesome. We want to know about it. If you had a different take, we'd love to know about that too. So just share your comments in our Instagram feed. Send us an email. We would love to feature future commentary too. So if there's something that's interesting and you want to be on an episode, maybe we feature you. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just sort of speaking on my ass right now, but like we'd love to hear from you. That's what I'm saying. We'd love to hear any and all feedback. Let us know on Instagram, contact@panelism.inc. And then you can find all our podcasts by searching Panelism wherever you find podcasts. We're on Spotify, we're on Google Play, we're on Apple Podcasts, all of the rest. We've got some other shows too that we've either produced or worked on over the years. All of it's there. Panelism.inc, panelism.ink. And it's kind of, that's basically it. I'm so glad. I'm so glad we read March. Oh my God. This was a fulfilling, in many, many ways pick. And it's just, I'm glad you were willing to read it with me. And I love your take.
And like I said, like I've already put this on the wish list for so many people, not in a pushy way, of course, but I want the children in my life to have an accessible way to read this story and appreciate its power.
Yeah.
And the adults too, but I know this was not told to me as a child, so that's what I hope to give.
Yeah. Well, enjoy those books. Happy reading, and we'll be back next time with more great comics. Until then.